My husband always forced me to take birth control because he didn't want children, but I found out he has a child with someone else. My name is Claire Hensley. From the moment I got married, I thought I was stepping into a life where love meant compromise and building dreams together. Instead, I found myself bound to a man who dictated what my future could and could not hold. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. When we were first married, I thought his insistence on practicality was a sign of maturity. "Kids not now," he would say, with a steady voice pressing a prescription into my hand. I was young enough then to believe him, to think he was just cautious that maybe one day he would change his mind. But that day never came. Every month I found myself at the pharmacy counter sliding across the birth control pills like a guilty secret. Not my secret, his. His fear of children, his refusal to become a father, his strange obsession with control. It all condensed into those small white tablets I swallowed. At first, I told myself it was temporary. Then, as the years passed, the weight of each pill became heavier, pressing down on my chest. I wanted children. I wanted to cradle a baby, to hear the soft coos at night, to see the reflection of our love in a tiny face. But every time I hinted at it, he would harden his voice, clipped, "Not happening, Claire. Don't bring it up again." He was never cruel with his fists, but with words sharp, precise, final, he built a cage around me. Sometimes late at night, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, calculating how many years of fertility I had left. My friends were announcing pregnancies, posting baby showers, filling their homes with laughter. I smiled for them, but when I closed the door, silence greeted me like a punishment. I began to notice how he carried himself when the subject came up with others. At dinner parties, when friends teased us about being next to have children, he would laugh too loudly, deflect with jokes, and squeeze my hand under the table, not lovingly, but as a warning. His grip told me, "Don't you dare say a word." I obeyed. Marriage for me had become a series of compromises where I gave and he took. I worked as a teacher, pouring love into other people's children while returning home to an empty house. Sometimes I would catch myself lingering too long when a student hugged me, as if their small arms could fill the hollow place inside me that my husband refused to acknowledge. Yet I tried to rationalize. Maybe he had his reasons. Maybe he carried some unspoken trauma, a fear he couldn't share. So I softened my questions, hoping he would open up. "We don't have to rush, but do you ever think about it? About being a father?" His eyes would narrow, his jaw would tighten. "Claire, I told you no kids? Ever." End of discussion. The way he said it, final and unyielding, left me with no room to breathe. But inside, something began to smolder. The turning point came on a Sunday afternoon. I was refilling my pill case when he walked by and reminded me, like always, "Don't forget, you're not skipping a single day." It wasn't concern. It wasn't love. It was command. I looked at him, then really looked at him, and for the first time I saw not a husband, but a warden. And I was his prisoner. What he didn't know was that every command, every dismissal, every pill swallowed in silence was writing a story. I hadn't yet realized, a story where betrayal was waiting for me in the shadows. Because while he chained me to childlessness somewhere out there, he had broken his own rule. He had given another woman what he denied me, a child. But I didn't know that yet. All I had was suspicion, a gnawing ache, and a growing certainty that something was wrong in our perfect, controlled little marriage. And when the truth began to unravel, it wouldn't just shatter the illusion of our life together, it would destroy him. A marriage built on rules. That's what I had, not a partnership, not a home filled with warmth, but a set of invisible lines I was never allowed to cross. My husband Daniel liked order. He thrived on it. At first, I mistook it for discipline, for structure, qualities that made him successful at work, admired by others. He managed money meticulously, checked every receipt, tracked every cent. He scheduled our lives like we were in the military: when to eat, when to visit his parents, even when we were allowed to take vacations. In the early years, I convinced myself it was stability. "He's just careful," I'd tell my friends when they laughed about how I had to get approval before buying new curtains. Careful meant safe, right? But slowly, I began to realize careful was just another word for control. The rules didn't end with money. They seeped into intimacy too. Our bedroom wasn't a place of love. It was more like a contract negotiation. He had conditions, timing demands, and always the reminder: don't forget your pill. Sometimes when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My face looked older, not just from age but from restraint, as though I had been living years holding my breath. There were moments when the cracks in his mask appeared, though. Subtle, fleeting things. The way he would turn off his phone quickly when I entered the room. The way he avoided long conversations about the future. The way his smile faltered when friends spoke about children. One evening at a gathering, his colleague's wife leaned over to me and asked with a laugh, "So Claire, when are you two finally going to give us baby news?" I remember my cheeks flushed hot, and before I could respond, Daniel chuckled and wrapped his arm around me. "Oh, Claire, she's too busy teaching everyone else's kids. I've got all the noise I can handle." Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. Because under that laugh was something sharp. His grip on my shoulder tightened, not affectionate but controlling, as if reminding me, "Play along." I smiled, but inside humiliation burned. I wasn't just being denied motherhood. I was being painted as the reason why. He made it sound as though it was my choice, my unwillingness. That was his way twisting the story so he always came out looking clean. After that night, I began to watch him differently. Not as my husband, but as a puzzle I couldn't solve. Why this obsession with no children? Why the secrecy in his eyes? There was one evening I'll never forget. I came home early from work. The house was quiet, but his briefcase was on the table. I thought he must be upstairs. But when I climbed the steps, I heard him a low murmur from behind the locked bathroom door. At first, I thought he was just talking to himself. But then I realized it was his phone. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it with me. Gentle, even tender. I leaned closer, pressing my ear against the wood. And then a laugh. Not his. A child's. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. My heart stuttered. I pulled back hands, trembling, blood rushing in my ears. When he came out minutes later, his face was composed like nothing had happened. He kissed me on the cheek absently and went downstairs. But my world was no longer the same. Because now the suspicion wasn't just a shadow, it had a sound. A child's laughter echoing through the walls of my marriage. That night, I lay awake next to him, staring at the ceiling again. But this time, I wasn't just calculating years lost to pills and silence. I was calculating the lies. How deep did they run? How long had this been going on? Daniel thought he built a life on rules. But rules can be broken. And I was starting to feel the first sharp edges of a rebellion forming inside me. I used to believe marriage was about asking questions together, building answers as a pair. But with Daniel, questions were forbidden. Especially when they brushed against the subject of family. It became a pattern. I'd wait for the right moment, a quiet evening, a dinner when he seemed relaxed, and I'd carefully steer the conversation. "Do you ever imagine us with a child?" I'd ask softly, trying not to sound demanding. Every time the result was the same. His body stiffened. His eyes narrowed. Then the storm. "Claire, how many times do we have to go through this?" I said no. End of discussion. That phrase, end of discussion, became the steel door slammed in my face. He used it like a weapon. I began to recognize the pattern of his gaslighting, the way he twisted my yearning into weakness. If I persisted, he would sigh, dramatically shake his head and say, "You're being emotional again. You need to be realistic. Kids aren't for us. Not for us." But the night I overheard that faint child's laughter, something inside me began to scream that it wasn't about us at all. From then on, I started noticing the silences in our house, the calls he answered in the driveway before stepping inside. The sudden need to work late on Fridays. The way he changed his shirt immediately after coming home, as if erasing the scent of another life. I wasn't foolish. I wasn't naive. My instincts told me something was wrong, but I was also trapped by years of being told I was paranoid, dramatic, too emotional. When someone repeats that to you often enough, you start to wonder if they're right. One afternoon, my friend Emily stopped by. She had her toddler with her, a round-cheeked boy who clung shyly to her leg. As I bent down to smile at him, Daniel walked into the room. For the briefest moment, I saw something flash across his face. Not discomfort, not irritation, but something almost wistful. And then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. He made a joke about sticky fingers, patted Emily on the back, and retreated to his office. But that look burned itself into my memory. It was the same look I had glimpsed once in the mirror, the longing I carried deep inside. Except he had buried his beneath walls of denial. Or worse, beneath something darker. I tried one last time. That evening, as he ate, I told him gently, "Daniel, I can't ignore this anymore. My whole body aches to be a mother. I don't understand why you won't even talk about it with me." His fork clattered onto the plate. His voice rose. "Because I don't want kids, Claire. And if you can't accept that, maybe you married the wrong man." Silence fell heavy between us. My hands shook, but not from fear this time. From rage. I didn't reply. I didn't argue. Because something inside me whispered he wasn't telling me the whole truth. He wasn't just a man who didn't want children. He was a man hiding a secret. That night, I lay awake again. Not with sadness this time, but with suspicion sharpened into determination. And when I drifted into restless sleep, I dreamed of the sound of a child's laughter echoing, taunting, daring me to uncover what he had buried. Have you ever been in a situation like this? If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind where the routine feels so predictable you could live it with your eyes closed. Daniel was in the kitchen pouring himself a glass of wine. I was chopping vegetables, pretending not to notice the way his phone buzzed on the counter every few minutes. He had become skilled at this, answering messages, quickly keeping his screen tilted just enough so I couldn't see. At first, I told myself it was work. He often claimed his job at the firm required constant availability. But a wife learns to read the silence between words, the shift in posture, the nervous flick of the eyes. His messages weren't about work. I knew that much. I kept my focus on the cutting board, the sound of the knife steady, while I asked, "How was your day?" "Busy," he replied, as always. Then, as if to dismiss the subject, he added, "Sometimes I think it's easier just to let the kids decide everything." The words slipped out casually, almost thoughtlessly, but they struck me like a slap. I froze, knife hovering midair. "The kids," I repeated slowly, careful not to betray the earthquake inside me. He blinked, his jaw tightening for half a second before he covered it with a laugh. "I meant my colleagues. They act like kids sometimes. You know how it is." He waved a hand, brushing it off, sipping his wine like nothing had happened. But I wasn't convinced. The word kids lingered in the air, sticky and undeniable. It wasn't the way he usually spoke about his colleagues. He often called them idiots or rookies, but never kids. And the way he caught himself, the quick scramble to cover it, was too revealing. I tried to act normal. "Right," I said, forcing a small laugh. "Your colleagues. Of course." Inside, my mind spun. The slip had cracked open a door, and behind it I could almost see the shape of a hidden life. After dinner, I excused myself early and sat in our bedroom staring at the wall. That single word echoed through me. Kids. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was a fracture in the mask he wore so tightly. Over the next days, I watched him more carefully than ever. Every interaction, every excuse, every time he disappeared into his phone. The signs were everywhere now that I was awake to them. On Thursday, he claimed he had to stay late at work. But when I called his office line, the secretary said he had left hours earlier. He came home past 9, smelling faintly of perfume. I didn't recognize his shirt, freshly changed. On Saturday, he said he needed to meet a client in another town. I offered to come along to make a day of it. His reaction was immediate, almost panicked. "No, Claire. It's not that kind of meeting. I'll be back before dinner." He didn't come back until midnight. And always there was that peculiar tenderness in his voice during certain phone calls, a softness I had never been given. One evening, I tested him. As he answered his phone in the hallway, I stepped out, suddenly pretending to fetch a glass of water. He startled, his face flashing with guilt as he quickly ended the call. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice light, almost playful. "Work." His answer was too fast, too smooth, like a script rehearsed one too many times. I smiled at him, pretending to believe, but inside my chest the smoldering ember of suspicion was growing into fire. The irony was bitter. For years he had controlled me, dictated my body, my choices, my future, all under the excuse that he didn't want children. And yet every sign now pointed to the truth I was terrified to name. Somewhere out there he already had a child. That night, as he slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling again. Except this time I wasn't grieving. I was planning. I thought about all the pills I had swallowed, all the nights I had cried silently into my pillow, all the dreams of motherhood that had withered inside me because of his iron command. And then I thought about another woman holding his child, perhaps tucking them into bed, while he smiled in a way he had never smiled at me. The injustice of it burned so deeply I had to press a hand over my chest just to steady my breath. But here's the thing: betrayal has a strange way of awakening parts of you that had been asleep. Where I had once been obedient, I now felt sharp. Where I had once been silent, I now hungered for truth. I knew I couldn't confront him yet. He was too skilled at twisting words, too practiced at making me doubt myself. I needed proof. Evidence that couldn't be denied. The slip of kids had been the first crack. Now I would pry it open until his whole world collapsed. And so began my quiet war. I started with small things. Checking his laundry for receipts. Peeking at his phone when he left it unattended for even a moment. Watching his face when certain names appeared on the screen. But I also played my role flawlessly. I cooked dinner. I laughed at his jokes. I even pretended to take my pills dutifully, though by then, the thought of obeying his command made me sick. He believed I was still his compliant wife, blind and trusting. What he didn't know was that I was awake now. And once a woman wakes up, nothing can put her back to sleep. The slip of one word had changed everything. And I was determined to follow that word, kids, to the truth he had buried. Because one day soon, Daniel was going to learn what it felt like to live under someone else's rules. Nights were when the silence of our house became unbearable. By day, Daniel could hide behind the noise of work errands, phone calls. But at night, the truth had a way of creeping through the cracks. It was a Wednesday when it happened. I had fallen asleep early, exhausted from grading essays, but some noise jolted me awake. At first I thought it was the wind brushing the trees against the window, but then I heard it again, a low murmur, steady, rhythmic. Daniel's voice. I turned toward his side of the bed. Empty. I slipped out quietly, my bare feet pressing against the cold hardwood. The glow under the door of his office painted a faint line in the dark hallway. He had said he was tired that night, claimed he needed an early sleep. Yet here he was, whispering at nearly midnight. I crept closer, careful not to let the floor creak. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, with me tinged with affection. I leaned closer, ear pressed against the door. "Yeah, you did great today. I'm proud of you." My breath caught. Then faintly, so faint I thought my imagination was cruelly playing tricks, I heard it. A child's laugh, high, sweet, bubbling through the receiver like sunlight breaking into the night. My knees almost gave way. I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself. The sound was so distinct, so innocent, and yet to me it was shattering. Daniel chuckled softly. All right, it's late. Listen to your mom now. I'll see you soon, okay?" The words drove into me like knives. "Mom, see you soon." I stumbled backward before he could open the door. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would rattle the walls. I hurried to the bedroom, crawled under the covers, and forced myself to breathe evenly, feigning sleep. Minutes later, he came in. I felt the mattress shift under his weight. He lay beside me, smelling faintly of cologne and guilt, his breathing calm. I stayed perfectly still, though my mind screamed. I couldn't sleep after that. I stared at the ceiling, the child's laughter echoing again and again, a cruel ghost dancing through my head. That sound changed everything. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't paranoia or a woman's imagination. It was proof. The next morning, I watched him carefully over breakfast. He hummed as he buttered his toast, casual, relaxed. He asked about my lesson plans, made small talk about the news, as though nothing had happened, as though he hadn't just revealed an entire life I wasn't supposed to know about. I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, slam my hands against the table, and force the truth out of him. But I didn't. Not yet. Because I knew how he worked. He'd deny it, twist it, make me feel insane. He had done it before, every time I brought up children. He would make me the unreasonable one. Not this time. This time, I would gather the truth piece by piece until it was undeniable, until I could crush his lies under the weight of evidence. So I began to listen more carefully. I noticed how he excused himself to the office at night with his phone, how he slipped outside on the porch to make quick calls, how sometimes he returned with a softness in his eyes, the kind of softness he had never spared for me. I began timing his absences, tracking them. Every Tuesday he left early. Every Friday he came home late. His excuses grew thinner, but he still assumed I was too obedient, too blinded by love to question him. One evening I tested him again. "Daniel," I said as I set down the plates, "do you ever think about how different life would be if we had children?" The fork froze halfway to his mouth. His eyes flicked up to mine, sharp-guarded. "Claire," he said, his voice clipped, "we've been over this. Stop living in fantasy." I smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel like fantasy. Sometimes it feels like you already know." The silence that followed was heavy, stretching long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. He forced a laugh, shaking his head. "You're being ridiculous." Then he changed the subject, but I saw it. The flicker of fear. The panic he tried to bury under his mask. That night, he didn't make his usual phone call. Instead, he stayed in bed, stiff, watchful, as though sensing my suspicion. I turned away, hiding my smirk in the dark. I had rattled him. Good. The following weekend, I pretended to visit a friend. Instead, I parked a block away from our house and waited. Sure enough, Daniel left an hour later, dressed casually, but with the nervous energy of a man sneaking towards something forbidden. I followed. My hands shook on the wheel, my stomach in knots. He drove across town into a quieter neighborhood I didn't recognize. He pulled up in front of a modest little house painted blue with white shutters, and then the door opened. A woman stepped out holding the hand of a child, a boy maybe 6 or 7 years old. Brown hair, bright eyes, the same dimple Daniel had. I gasped, pressing a hand over my mouth. Daniel walked up the path, his face transforming into something I had never seen in all our years together. Soft, gentle, joyful. He bent down, scooped the boy into his arms, and kissed the woman on the cheek. It was as if the man I lived with and the man I was watching were two entirely different people. I felt something inside me crack. Not just anger, not just betrayal, but a kind of grief that hollowed me out. Because all those years he said no. All those years he robbed me of motherhood. He had been living the life I begged for, just not with me. I sat in the car until my tears blurred the windshield. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't fathom how deep his lies went. But one thing was clear, this was no longer suspicion. It was truth. And truth is far more dangerous than doubt. If the sound of a child's laughter cracked open the door of truth, then what I found next flung it wide open. It happened on a Saturday morning. Daniel had left early, claiming he had a client meeting 2 towns over. I didn't argue. In fact, I kissed him goodbye with a smile, watching him walk out the door, pretending to be the same obedient wife he thought I was. But the moment his car disappeared down the street, I began my search. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. Maybe bank receipts? Maybe scraps of paper? Anything that could explain the double life I had witnessed outside that little blue house. His office was the obvious place to begin. Daniel prided himself on organization. His desk was immaculate files, neatly labeled drawers aligned. But perfection has a way of becoming suspicious in itself. I opened drawers, carefully rifled through folders of tax documents, business contracts, bills. Nothing out of place. But then I noticed a small wooden box at the back of the lowest drawer. It wasn't locked, just tucked away, as if he assumed I'd never look that far. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, among a few old watches and cufflinks, was a stack of photographs. Most were harmless Daniel with coworkers Daniel at a golf outing. But then buried halfway down I found it. A photo that made my breath catch in my throat. It was Daniel. He was kneeling on the grass in what looked like a park. In his arms was a young boy, the same boy I had seen from my car, the one with the bright eyes and dimpled smile. The child's tiny hands clung around his neck, and Daniel's face. My God, his face. I had never seen him look that way. His eyes crinkled with genuine joy, his smile unguarded, tender. He looked like a father, a real father, something he had sworn he would never be. I sank into the chair, clutching the photo. My whole body shook. It was one thing to suspect, to overhear, to catch glimpses of a life half hidden. But this was proof captured in color and light. My husband had a child he loved, a child he denied me. For years he'd forced me to swallow those tiny white pills, stripping me of choices, robbing me of the chance to create life. And yet, here he was, holding in his arms the very thing he claimed he never wanted. I wanted to scream, to rip the photo in half, to confront him the moment he walked through the door. But I didn't. Not yet. Because as much as it destroyed me, I realized this was power. This photo wasn't just proof of betrayal, it was leverage. I slipped it into my desk drawer, hidden beneath lesson plans and old grading sheets. My secret. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I moved through the motions, laundry, cleaning, cooking, but my mind was locked on that image. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's smile, not for me, not for us, but for someone else. For a woman who had given him what he denied me. When he returned that evening, he was in high spirits, humming as he hung his jacket. He kissed my cheek lightly, asked what was for dinner. His mood was almost boyish, carefree. I studied him as he poured himself a drink. Could he sense my knowledge? Could he see the storm behind my eyes? No, of course not. Daniel was too arrogant, too certain of his control. He believed I was still blind, still tethered by his rules. We ate dinner together. He talked about work, about a new project he was leading. I nodded, smiled, played the part. But beneath the table, my fists were clenched so tightly my nails dug crescents into my palms. That night, after he fell asleep, I slipped out of bed and retrieved the photo again. I sat by the window, moonlight spilling across the boy's face. My heart ached in ways I couldn't put into words. That child, innocent, beautiful, wasn't to blame. He hadn't asked to be born into a web of lies. And yet I couldn't stop the wave of envy that crushed me. That child had the love I begged for. That child had made Daniel into a father, while I had been forced into silence. I whispered into the night. Why her and not me? But there was no answer. Only the quiet hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the steady ticking of the clock, and Daniel's even breathing from the bedroom. Over the following weeks, I carried the weight of that photo in my chest. Every time Daniel reminded me about my pills, every time he dismissed the subject of children, I thought of it. The image of him with the boy made his lies ring louder, his control more grotesque. I began to withdraw, though he didn't notice at first. I went through the motions, but inside I was changing, hardening. And then one evening, I tested him again. We were watching TV, some forgettable sitcom, when I turned to him and said casually, "Do you ever think about what kind of father you'd be?" He stiffened instantly, his jaw tightening. "Claire, we've talked about this. I'm not father material." I tilted my head, watching him carefully. Funny. You look like you'd be a natural. His eyes flicked to mine, sharp suspicious. But he said nothing. Just turned back to the screen. I smiled faintly in the glow of the television. Because I knew something he didn't, his perfect mask was already cracking. And one day when the time was right, I'd rip it away completely. The photo burned a hole in my mind. For days I carried its weight like a stone in my chest. It was proof, undeniable, unshakable. And yet, proof without confrontation was like a loaded gun locked in a drawer. Eventually, I couldn't hold it in anymore. It was a Sunday afternoon, rain beating steadily against the windows. Daniel was sprawled on the couch watching the game, beer in hand. He looked relaxed, unbothered, as if the world around him was perfectly in order. I stood in the doorway, clutching the photo in my hand, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Daniel?" I said, my voice steady, though my heart was trembling. "Who is this?" He glanced lazily in my direction, then froze, his eyes locked on the photograph. In that split second, his expression shifted shock, then calculation. I watched him smooth his face into calm. "Where did you get that?" His tone was sharp, commanding. "That doesn't matter," I shot back. "Who is this child?" "Daniel, who's the woman?" For a moment, silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of rain. I thought foolishly that he might tell the truth, that the weight of his lies might finally crush him. But instead he leaned back against the couch, smirking. "Claire, you're losing it." My stomach dropped. "This," he reached out, plucked the photo from my hands and held it up casually. "This is from a company picnic years ago. That's one of my colleagues' kids. You're reading too much into it." I shook my head violently. "Don't lie to me. I saw you, Daniel. I followed you." "I know." That caught him off guard. His smirk faltered for a second. Then he set the photo down carefully on the table, as though the calmness of his movements could erase my words. "You followed me." His voice dropped lower. "Dangerous. Do you hear yourself? Do you realize how crazy that sounds?" Anger surged through me. "Don't you dare turn this around on me." I heard the calls. I heard the laughter. "I saw you with him." He laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Claire, you've always been emotional, always imagining things. Do you think maybe you're projecting? You want kids so badly you're starting to invent them." The words hit me like blows. He was doing it again, gaslighting me, twisting my reality until I questioned my own mind. But this time I clung to the truth like a lifeline. "No, not this time, Daniel. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Stop lying." His face hardened. He leaned forward, his eyes cold. "You need help, Claire. You're obsessed. This is why I don't want kids with you, because you can't even handle yourself." The cruelty of it stole my breath. Years of longing, of swallowing pills, of bending under his control, and now he was using my pain as proof of my instability. I turned away, fighting the tears burning my eyes. He thought he had won. He thought his words had shattered me, as they always had. But he didn't see what I hid behind my silence. I wasn't broken. I was angry. And anger, once it hardens into resolve, is far stronger than despair. For the next week, I played along. I let him think his gaslighting had worked, that I had retreated back into submission. I cooked. I cleaned. I even smiled when he teased me about being too sensitive. But inside I was steel. Every glance at that photo, every memory of his words fueled me. He had denied me, humiliated me, twisted my longing into madness. But the truth was out there, breathing, laughing, a child who bore his smile, his dimples. And one day soon, I would make sure Daniel's lies crumbled in front of everyone who believed his perfect facade. For now, though, I let him think he still had control. I let him press the pills into my hand with his usual smug reminder. I swallowed them in front of him, then went to the bathroom and spit them into the sink. He didn't notice. He never noticed. He was too certain of his power. But certainty breeds blindness, and his blindness would be his downfall. Because the more he tried to gaslight me, the more determined I became. The photo wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a weapon. A weapon I would use at the perfect time, when his guard was down, when his lies had no way out. He thought he had silenced me with words. But he had no idea I was already sharpening mine into the blade that would cut his entire world apart. Once Daniel tried to twist my reality and dismiss me as crazy, something inside me snapped into clarity. He had underestimated me for years, assuming my silence meant weakness. He thought a few sharp words and gaslighting could lock me back in the cage he had built. But he was wrong. Silence can be dangerous, yes, but not for the one holding the secrets. It's dangerous for the one uncovering them. And I had decided I would become his silence watching, listening gathering. That Monday morning, after he left for work, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook in front of me. For the first time in years, I wasn't preparing lesson plans for my students. I was preparing an investigation, one that had nothing to do with literature and everything to do with betrayal. I began with what I already knew. Patterns. Daniel was predictable. He claimed to thrive on structure, and he wasn't wrong, but structure leaves trails. He left the house at the same time every day, yet certain evenings he came home late, always with thin excuses. He traveled for work on the same weekends every month. I listed the dates, the times, the excuses he had given. Behavior. He answered certain phone calls away from me. His tone changed softer, almost tender. He often slipped outside late at night, pacing the porch as he whispered into the dark. I wrote down the times those calls occurred, trying to map the frequency. Evidence. The photo I had found wasn't alone. In his office drawer, there were more papers I hadn't gone through, more places to check, but I couldn't risk being caught rummaging too long. I'd need to choose my moments carefully. I stared at the list, my pen tapping against the page. A teacher's habit: observe, analyze, conclude. This wasn't a lesson plan. It was a blueprint for survival. The first step was his phone. He guarded it closely, but even careful men make mistakes. That evening after dinner, he showered, leaving his phone on the kitchen counter. My heart raced as I snatched it up, my fingers trembling. He had, of course, set a lock code. But I had watched him enter it hundreds of times. 4 digits. My birthday. His arrogance disgusted me, using my birthday as the key to his double life. The screen lit up. I swallowed hard and began scrolling. His messages with me were sparse, functional. Grocery lists, reminders, the occasional "be home late." But in his recent calls, one number appeared again and again, saved only as work. I knew it wasn't work. I opened the call log. Dozens of calls, sometimes twice a day. My hand shook as I copied the number into my notebook. I didn't dare call it yet. I wasn't ready to hear her voice. But I had it now. Proof carved into digits. I returned the phone just as the water stopped upstairs. My heart pounded so loudly I thought he might hear it from the hallway. But when he walked into the kitchen moments later, toweling his hair, he didn't suspect a thing. He kissed my cheek absently, poured himself a drink, and settled into his chair like a man with nothing to hide. The next day, I dug deeper. I used the school computer during my lunch break to search public records. Phone numbers can reveal names if you know where to look. And there it was. A name attached to the number. A woman's name. Melissa Hart. I whispered it to myself, the syllables tasting bitter on my tongue. Melissa. She was the shadow in my marriage, the thief of my stolen motherhood. But it wasn't enough to have her name. I needed more. I searched further. Addresses, social media. And then, there she was. A photograph on her profile, smiling on the porch of a small blue house. The same house I had parked in front of weeks ago. And beside her, the boy. His hand in hers, his grin wide, the same dimple Daniel had. My breath left me in a rush. It was all real. Every suspicion, every sleepless night, every unanswered question, it had been leading here. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It had a name, a face, an address. For the next few days, I lived in 2 worlds. By day, I was the teacher guiding my students through Shakespeare and poetry, forcing myself to smile when they asked questions. By night, I was the investigator, tracing Melissa's life through every post, every photograph, every breadcrumb she left online. I learned the boy's name, Oliver, 7 years old. He liked soccer superheroes' pancakes on Saturdays. I learned Melissa was a nurse at a clinic across town. Her life was modest but warm, filled with the kind of love and light I had long been denied. And everywhere I looked, Daniel was there too, woven subtly into their lives. A photo of Oliver at a soccer game with a man's arm barely visible at the edge of the frame. A birthday cake with handwriting on the card that matched Daniel's. He hadn't just fathered a child. He had built another family. The realization hollowed me out. It wasn't just the betrayal of infidelity. It was the theft of a dream I had begged him for stolen and given to someone else. At night, lying beside him as he slept, I would stare at the ceiling and whisper the boy's name to myself. Oliver, the ghost child who haunted my marriage. But grief was slowly giving way to rage. I began to imagine the reveal, the look on his face when everyone learned the truth. The perfect mask torn away in front of colleagues, friends, family. He thought he had silenced me with pills and commands, but I was gathering the truth, stacking it like kindling. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to strike the match. For now, I kept my silence. I let him press the pill packet into my palm each night with his smug reminder. I nodded, smiled, played the obedient wife. But every time I slipped those pills down the drain instead of my throat, I felt myself growing stronger. Because the day was coming when Daniel's lies would burn. And when they did, I would be the one holding the fire. The cruelest truths are the ones that stretch back further than you ever dared imagine. They don't just wound you in the present, they rewrite your past, staining every memory with their rot. That's what I discovered when I learned exactly how long Oliver had been part of Daniel's life. At first, I thought maybe the affair was recent. Maybe this was a midlife crisis, some late betrayal born from boredom. That would have been easier to swallow, not forgivable, but containable. But reality rarely grants mercy. It was a Thursday evening when the final piece of the puzzle fell into my lap. Daniel had left his laptop open on the kitchen table, a rare slip. He was upstairs showering. My pulse quickened as I sat down in front of the screen. I knew I had only minutes. The email tab was open. Most of it looked like work correspondence, dry contracts, schedules, reports. But then I saw the folder, tucked neatly among the others, innocuous at a glance, labeled simply personal. I clicked. The emails inside dated back years. At first, they seemed harmless enough exchanges with his parents' holiday reminders. But then I saw her name, Melissa Hart. My breath caught. The earliest email between them was dated more than 8 years ago. My hands trembled as I scrolled. Their tone was warm, intimate, casual. Arrangements for dinners, inside jokes, small updates. And then a photo attachment. I hesitated, my stomach turning before clicking it open. There she was, Melissa smiling gently at the camera. In her arms was a baby boy wrapped in a blanket, his tiny face peaceful. The timestamp read 7 years ago. I felt the world tilt beneath me. 7 years. Oliver wasn't the product of some fleeting mistake. He had been there for nearly the entire span of my marriage. While Daniel was forcing pills into my hand, forbidding me from motherhood, he was already a father. I scrolled further, tears blurring my vision. Emails about Oliver's first steps, his first words, his first day at school. Each milestone, every moment I had dreamed of had been given to another woman. And Daniel, my husband, had been there for it all. I closed the laptop as I heard the water stop upstairs. My heart raced, my body trembling with a mixture of grief and fury. When he came down minutes later, dressed in sweatpants, humming as though life were ordinary, I could barely look at him. How many times had I smiled across the dinner table while he carried the weight of this secret? How many times had I swallowed my dreams whole while he was off living them elsewhere? The betrayal wasn't just in the act of having a child with another woman. It was in the years of silence, the deliberate cruelty of denying me motherhood while reveling in it with someone else. That night, I lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed every argument, every time he said no, every time he pressed those pills into my hand. I realized now it wasn't fear of fatherhood that drove him. It was selfishness. He wanted the role, but only with her. only with Melissa. The next morning, I could barely focus at school. My students noticed my distraction. One girl asked if I was okay, her young eyes full of concern. It nearly broke me, because in their laughter, their chatter, their innocence, I saw everything I had been denied. That evening, Daniel was in unusually good spirits. He poured wine, ordered takeout, made jokes. He acted like a man without a care in the world. And as I watched him laugh across the table, something crystallized inside me. He believed he had won. He thought he had buried the truth deep enough to keep me docile forever. He thought his gaslighting had worked, that I would keep doubting myself, shrinking into silence. But he didn't know how far I had gone. I had names, dates, photos, emails. I knew Melissa. I knew Oliver. I knew the years he had stolen from me. The truth wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a weapon. Still, I didn't reveal it. Not yet. Timing was everything. Instead, I asked him a question, my voice calm. Do you ever regret it? Not having kids. He chuckled, sipping his wine. No, we made the right choice. Kids aren't for us. I nodded, my lips curving into a faint smile. Funny. That's not the impression I get. He froze for the briefest second, then quickly masked it with a laugh. You're imagining things again, Claire. But I wasn't. I leaned back in my chair, letting him think he still held control. But inside, I was already envisioning the moment his mask would shatter. Because betrayal has a strange way of sharpening the senses. Every lie he told now only fueled my determination. Every denial only made me more certain. The cruelest truth wasn't just that he had a child. It was that he had chosen to let me waste years of my life in longing while he enjoyed in secret what he denied me in public. And that cruelty deserved exposure. How do you think they will react when I reveal that to everyone? After I pieced together the full truth, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't peace. No peace was long gone, but a clarity that came with finally knowing the full scope of Daniel's betrayal. 7 years. That was how long Oliver had been alive, and 7 years was how long Daniel had been feeding me lies. I didn't cry anymore. The tears had dried up, replaced by something colder, sharper. I knew if I confronted him again, it would be pointless. He'd twist my words, call me unstable, make me question my sanity. He had perfected that game. But I wasn't going to play by his rules anymore. Instead, I decided to wear a mask of my own. The plan wasn't fully formed yet, but I knew one thing: patience would be my weapon. If he thought I was still the obedient wife, the submissive Claire who swallowed pills and kept her head down, then I could move in the shadows while he basked in his arrogance. So I slipped back into my role. At breakfast, when he reminded me about the pills, I smiled faintly and said, "Of course." I swallowed them in front of him, then excused myself to the bathroom where I spit them out, flushing them away with a calm satisfaction. When he mentioned working late, I kissed him goodbye at the door, watching him leave with a tender smile that made him believe I was none the wiser. When he laughed at dinner, when he touched my hand in public, when he made jokes about other people's children, I laughed along, my performance flawless. All the while, I was documenting every call log, every absence, every piece of proof I could gather. I built a secret file hidden away in a binder beneath my teaching materials. My students' essays on Shakespeare lay on top. Daniel would never look there. And while I played the role of dutiful wife, my mind wandered to darker places. Sometimes I imagined what it would look like when I finally revealed everything. His colleagues' staring jaws dropping as I laid bare the truth of his double life, his family recoiling in disgust, Melissa's name no longer hidden but spoken aloud in whispers of judgment. Other times I imagined walking away entirely, packing my bags in silence, leaving him to choke on the emptiness he had created. But no, that felt too easy for him. He deserved humiliation, exposure, a fall from the pedestal he had built so carefully. One night, I sat across from him at the dinner table, studying him as he talked about work. He was animated, full of pride about a project he was leading. His hands moved as he spoke, his voice carrying the same commanding authority that once intimidated me. But now I saw through it. He wasn't powerful. He was a liar standing on a crumbling foundation. Daniel, I said softly, interrupting him. He looked at me surprised. Yeah, I smiled. I just want you to know, I'm grateful for you, for everything you've done for me. His chest swelled with pride. He reached across the table, squeezed my hand. I'm glad you see that, Claire. Sometimes you don't realize how good you have it. I smiled again, hiding the venom behind my teeth. Because he thought he had fooled me into gratitude when in reality I was buying time. Time to sharpen the knife I would one day twist. The dual life I was living began to feel surreal. At school, I taught lessons about betrayal in literature, about characters who hid truths until their downfalls. My students laughed at the drama of it all, never realizing I was living a story darker than Shakespeare could have written. At home, I played the dutiful wife, but inside I rehearsed my lines for the moment I would turn the stage against him. The hardest part was seeing him so comfortable. He thought he had won. He thought I was defeated. He believed his lies were stronger than my reality. But what he didn't know was that reality always finds a way out. Lies collapse under their own weight, and I was patient enough to let him dig his own grave. I began planting small cracks in his world, subtle things he wouldn't notice at first. I encouraged him to invite his colleagues over one evening. I watched how he interacted, how he avoided certain topics. When someone asked him if we had children, I leaned forward and smiled sweetly, saying, "Oh, Daniel doesn't want kids." His face tightened briefly, but he laughed it off, joking about how I was enough work. The guests laughed, but I caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. He wasn't used to me playing along so smoothly. That night, when we were alone, he said sharply, "Don't joke like that again." I tilted my head. "Why not? It's the truth, isn't it?" He stared at me for a moment, then muttered, "You know how people talk. I don't want them pitying us." I gave him a small apologetic smile. "Of course, I'll be more careful." He believed me. But what I was really doing was planting seeds. Seeds of suspicion, seeds of cracks, seeds of doubt in his perfectly constructed mask. Over the weeks, I honed my patience like a blade. I no longer felt like a prisoner, I felt like a predator circling prey. And though Daniel still believed he was in control, I knew better. Because the day was coming when I would flip the script. The day was coming when I would stand before him no longer the wife who swallowed pills and silence, but the woman who held his entire world in her hands. And when that day came, it wouldn't just be me who saw the truth. It would be everyone. Patience had become my sharpest weapon, but there comes a time when patience must evolve into strategy. I'd gathered enough proof, hidden enough rage behind smiles, and played the obedient wife long enough. Now it was time to start breaking Daniel's mask piece by piece in ways subtle enough that he couldn't pin it on me yet, sharp enough that the pressure would start to build. The first opportunity came on a Saturday evening. Daniel had invited two of his colleagues and their wives for dinner. He wanted to impress them to show off our perfect marriage. I played my part well, cooking, smiling, laughing at his jokes. But I'd prepared something he didn't expect. When one of the wives, a sweet woman named Sarah, asked me casually, "So, Claire, do you two ever think about kids?" I set down my glass of wine and smiled warmly. "Oh, Daniel doesn't want children," I said lightly, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The table fell silent for a heartbeat. Sarah blinked. "Really?" Daniel chuckled too quickly, waving a hand. "Yeah, I'm just not the dad type. We're happy as we are." But his voice had a slight edge to it, the kind only I would catch. His colleagues laughed awkwardly, changing the subject. Later, when we were alone in the kitchen, he turned on me, his jaw tight. "Why did you say that?" I looked at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Because it's true, isn't it? You've told me 1,000 times." His mouth opened, then closed. He stared at me for a long moment before shaking his head. "Just don't bring it up again." I smiled faintly. Of course. Inside, I savored the crack I had just widened. The second time was less subtle. We were at a family gathering at his parents' house. His mother, a sharp woman who always seemed to disapprove of me, asked why we hadn't given her grandchildren. Before Daniel could jump in, I said sweetly, Daniel decided we'd never have kids. He doesn't believe in it. The room went quiet. His mother frowned, her gaze shifting to him. Is that true, Daniel? He stammered, caught off guard. Well, it's just not the right time. 7 years of marriage isn't the right time, she snapped. I lowered my gaze, playing the part of the resigned wife. It's fine. I've accepted it. The sympathy in her eyes burned him more than her scolding. He glared at me all evening, his hand clenching and unclenching on his knee. On the way home, he exploded. What the hell was that? Claire, do you enjoy making me look like a monster? I turned to him calmly. I didn't make you look like anything, Daniel. You made those choices. I just told the truth. He slammed the steering wheel, cursing under his breath. But he couldn't argue, and I sat beside him in silence, my heart steady, knowing I had tightened the rope around his lies a little more. The third strike was bolder. I invited Emily, my closest friend, over for coffee one afternoon. Daniel was home working in his office. We chatted casually in the living room, our voices carrying through the house. At one point, Emily sighed and said, I can't believe how fast my kids are growing. You must feel the same. Claire, don't you wish you had one of your own? I looked directly at the office door, knowing Daniel could hear every word. I do, I said softly. But Daniel never wanted them. He made sure of that. Emily's eyes widened. You mean, yes? I whispered, my voice shaking just enough to sound vulnerable. He made me take birth control all these years. Said kids would ruin everything. I heard the scrape of Daniel's chair from the office, the sound of his footsteps pacing. He didn't come out, but I knew he had heard. When Emily left, he stormed into the room, his face red. What did you just do? I looked up from the dishes, calm as ever. I had a conversation with my friend. That's allowed, isn't it? You're trying to humiliate me, he hissed. I set down the plate and met his eyes. No, Daniel. I'm just tired of lying for you. He froze, his mouth opening and closing without words. Then he turned and stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door. And I smiled because the cracks were no longer small. They were spreading like fractures in glass. Over the next weeks, I orchestrated more situations, each one designed to chip away at his carefully curated image. At church, I accidentally asked for prayers for those of us who long for children but are denied. At a school fundraiser, I spoke casually to a group of parents about how Daniel doesn't believe in fatherhood. Each time I played the innocent wife, my tone soft, my words simple. But each time I watched Daniel's face tighten, his lies wobble under the weight of public scrutiny. He began snapping more often at home. Small things set him off: the way I folded laundry, the meals I cooked, the way I laughed at the wrong moment. His control was slipping, and he knew it. But what he didn't know was that I was far from finished. Because exposing his hypocrisy wasn't just about embarrassing him in front of others. It was about dragging the truth into the light, the truth of Oliver, of Melissa, of the years he had stolen from me. And I was saving that reveal for the moment when his world was most fragile. Until then, I would keep pressing, keep widening the cracks, keep letting him destroy himself with his own anger, his own fear. Because the more he squirmed, the sweeter the moment of collapse would be. Sometimes at night, I'd lie awake and imagine it. The look on his face when I finally revealed everything, the way his colleagues' admiration would curdle into disgust, the way his parents would recoil in shame. I imagined Melissa's name spoken out loud in public, no longer hidden in phone logs and emails. I imagined Oliver's face appearing in photos I would one day lay in front of him, undeniable. The man who forced me into silence for years would have nowhere left to hide. Daniel thought he was the one in control, but he was dancing on strings he couldn't even see. Strings I had tied carefully, patiently, one by one. And when I pulled them all tight, he would collapse like the puppet he was. There comes a point in every secret where silence is no longer protection, but poison. For years, Daniel's silence had poisoned me, my dreams, my body, my marriage. But now I held the antidote: truth. And truth, when unleashed, can be more devastating than any weapon. I chose the moment carefully. Timing was everything. If I revealed too soon, he'd deny, twist, and gaslight. If I waited too long, I risked collapsing under the weight of carrying his secret alone. I needed the perfect stage somewhere public enough that he couldn't wriggle free yet, intimate enough that the betrayal would pierce through the people whose opinions mattered to him most. That moment came at his company's annual dinner. Daniel loved those events. They were his stage, his spotlight. He thrived on admiration, on colleagues patting him on the back, on being seen as the brilliant, reliable man with a flawless home life. He always insisted I attend polished and smiling, his perfect accessory. That year, I agreed more willingly than usual. I wore the dress he liked, deep navy, modest but elegant. I curled my hair just so, painted on a smile that looked like love but tasted like venom. When we walked into the glittering banquet hall, his arm looped through mine, I could feel his pride radiating. He thought he had already won. Dinner was lavish speeches, long wine flowing freely. Daniel basked in it, all laughing too loudly at jokes, making grand gestures. To anyone watching, he was the picture of success. And then, as dessert was being served, someone at the table turned to me with a polite smile. "So Claire, do you and Daniel ever think about having kids? You'd make such wonderful parents." For years, that question had been my torment. For years, I had smiled through the ache, letting Daniel answer, letting him write the story. But not tonight. I set down my fork and smiled sweetly. "Oh, Daniel doesn't want children. He's always made that very clear." There was a ripple of surprise around the table. Daniel stiffened beside me. He chuckled, his voice tight. "Well, you know how it is. Kids aren't for everyone." I tilted my head, studying him. "That's funny, though, because you're such a wonderful father." The table fell silent. Forks paused midair. Daniel's face drained of color. "Excuse me." I leaned back, my smile calm, my voice even. "Oh, don't be shy. I think Oliver would agree you're a fantastic dad." Gasps erupted. His colleagues exchanged confused looks. His boss frowned. The wives leaned closer, wide-eyed. Daniel's jaw worked soundlessly. "Claire." I reached into my purse and pulled out the photograph I had kept hidden for weeks, the one of him kneeling in the grass. Oliver in his arms, his smile unguarded. I slid it across the table. "This is my husband," I said softly. "The man who forced me to take birth control for years because he didn't want children. The man who told everyone we weren't ready, that I was too emotional, too obsessed. The man who gaslit me into silence. And yet all this time he's been living another life. With another woman. With their child." The photo lay in the center of the table, damning and undeniable. Murmurs spread like wildfire. His boss's eyes narrowed. One of his colleagues muttered under his breath. The women shook their heads, whispering. Daniel snatched the photo, his face crimson. "This is ridiculous. Lies. Lies." I interrupted, my voice sharp but steady. "I've seen the emails, Daniel. 8 years worth. I've seen the birthday cards, the soccer games, the little blue house you sneak off to every Friday night." Lies. No. The only lie here is the one you built around me. He slammed his fist on the table. Enough. But it was too late. The damage was done. His boss rose slowly, his face tight with disappointment. "Daniel, we'll discuss this later." He turned and walked away, others following, shaking their heads. The table dissolved into murmurs and stares, all of them directed at him, the golden man revealed to be a fraud. Daniel sat rigid, his breathing shallow, his hand clenched around the photo. His mask was gone, shattered under the weight of truth. I stood smoothing my dress, my voice calm. "You always said children weren't for us, Daniel. Turns out they just weren't for me." The room was silent as I turned and walked away, heels clicking against the polished floor, each step ringing like the toll of a bell. That night when we returned home, the silence between us was electric. He slammed the door shut, his face twisted with rage. "You humiliated me," he spat. I turned to him, slowly meeting his eyes with a steadiness he had never seen in me before. "No, Daniel. You humiliated yourself. I just removed the curtain." He glared at me, trembling with fury. "You've ruined me." I stepped closer, my voice a whisper sharp enough to cut. "Good. Because you ruined me years ago. Every pill you forced into my hand, every dream you crushed, every lie you spun. Now, finally, the ruin is yours." For the first time, he had no words. I left him standing there, broken, as I walked upstairs. And for the first time in years, I slept peacefully, because I knew this was only the beginning of his collapse. The morning after the company dinner, the house was suffocatingly quiet. Daniel didn't come downstairs. I imagined him lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment when his empire of lies collapsed in front of the very people he craved approval from. For once, I didn't feel the weight of his silence pressing down on me. It wasn't my silence anymore, it was his. I made myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window. It felt strange, almost surreal, to sit in the same chair where I'd once planned lessons and grocery lists, now sipping victory in a cup. The air was lighter, my chest no longer bound by invisible chains. When Daniel finally appeared, his face was pale, drawn. He didn't meet my eyes. For the first time in years, he looked small. "Claire," he began, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk." I let him speak. He stumbled through excuses, half-hearted apologies, desperate attempts to explain. He said things like, "It wasn't what you think, and I didn't want to hurt you." His words tangled into knots, flimsy threads trying to sew together a marriage already ripped apart. I listened in silence, my gaze steady, my heart untouched. Once his words had power over me. Once they had bent me into submission. But now they were nothing but noise. When he finally stopped, exhausted from his own lies, I set down my coffee cup. "You forced me to swallow pills," I said quietly. "You forced me to kill my own dreams year after year. And all the while you were living the very life you stole from me. Tell me, Daniel, was that love? Was that marriage?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I stood, pushing my chair back gently. "No, that was prison, and I've served my time." His eyes widened, fear flickering in them for the first time. "Claire, weighty." But I had already packed. The suitcase stood by the door, filled with clothes, books, the photograph I had kept as proof. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the carefully curated house he loved showing off, could rot with him. I looked at him one last time. Not with love, not with anger, but with something sharper, clarity. "You ruined me," I said softly. "But you also freed me, because now I know I deserve more than this. More than you." And with that I walked out. The weeks that followed were hard, but liberating. I stayed with Emily at first, her spare room filled with warmth and laughter I hadn't felt in years. I told her everything, and she listened without judgment, her arms holding me when the grief of lost years broke through. Word spread quickly. Daniel's colleagues distanced themselves. His reputation crumbled. His family, once cold toward me, called in shame, begging for explanations I no longer owed them. Melissa's name surfaced too, no longer hidden. People whispered, judged, turned away. He tried to call me, of course. Dozens of times. Each voicemail was the same mixture of anger and pleading. "You ruined my life, Claire. We can fix this. Please just come back." But I never answered, because the truth was he hadn't ruined my life. He had ruined his own. Mine was just beginning. I went back to teaching, but it felt different now. My students' laughter no longer tore at my heart with longing. Instead, it filled me with hope. I wasn't barren. I wasn't broken. I was alive, free, capable of building a life where my choices were mine alone. Sometimes I thought about Oliver, the boy with Daniel's dimples. My heart ached for him, not with envy anymore, but with sorrow. He was innocent, caught in the web of a man's selfishness. He had a mother who loved him, that was enough. He didn't need me. And as for Melissa, I no longer hated her. Betrayed by her, yes, but I understood now that women are often trapped in lies spun by men like Daniel. She had chosen her role, and I had chosen mine. The difference was, I had broken free. One evening, months later, I sat on Emily's porch watching the sun set. The sky burned with colors fierce and beautiful. She brought me tea and asked softly, "Do you regret it? Leaving him the way you did?" I shook my head. "No. The only thing I regret is staying as long as I did." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of summer. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't dared to piece. I knew my story wasn't unique. There were countless women like me, silenced, gaslit, denied, betrayed. But maybe, just maybe, by telling mine, someone else would recognize their own chains. And maybe they too would find the strength to break them. Because the cruelest betrayals can destroy you, or if you let them, they can rebuild you into someone stronger than you ever imagined. I lifted my cup, watching the sky darken into twilight. "Here's to the truth," I whispered. And for once, the truth was mine. Closing reflection. Slow fade out. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. Betrayal leaves scars, yes, but it also leaves lessons. Mine was simple. Never let someone else decide your life for you. Never let their silence become your prison. Have you ever been betrayed like this? What would you have done if you were me? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Grace's Truth for more. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction, it's reclaiming yourself.